All right, dealing with sole proprietorships. So this is something, again, think sole proprietorship, Schedule C, something that we'll see within the individual income tax lessons for sure. This is a type of business structure. There's only one owner, known as the sole proprietor. The sole proprietorship, it's the simplest and most common form of business entity. So again, if I am just driving for Uber or Lyft, generally speaking, that is going to be a sole proprietorship. Independent contractor. I'm not an employee, but it doesn't matter. I am reporting those income sources on my Schedule C. But also, if I'm an employee, I don't have a business, right? Even though I don't own Uber or Lyft, but I'm driving for them, that income is going to be independent contractor income. You're going to get a 1099. You're going to report that on your Schedule C. Now, one of the main benefits of a sole proprietorship, it's very easy and inexpensive, as we mentioned. There's no need to file any paperwork or register with the state, which can save time and money. And you are free to transfer your interest in the sole proprietorship at will. So if I'm just running a sole proprietorship bakery, I can just say, hey, I'll sell it to someone. Here, take my sole proprietorship. Give me, the money I'm selling it to you for. And that's it. There's not really any paperwork to file. I don't need to transfer legally anything, file any documents of transfer with the state. It's just boom, nice and easy. Now, however, because this type of entity is not a separate legal entity, you, as the sole proprietor, you're personally responsible for all the business debts and liabilities. So if you're running an ice cream business and you crash your ice cream truck into a building, you cause millions of dollars of damages. If you were in the ordinary scope of business and this was a legal entity such as an LLC or a corporation, you may be off the hook, and that's something we'll see in our business law lessons. However, sole proprietorship, there's no legal entity to protect you. That means that your personal assets, such as your house, car, savings, everything, those are at risk if you run into financial trouble, whether that's through just poor business, declining profits, or again, if you do something like crash your car and cause a lot of damage and you're liable for that. Now, another characteristic of this entity is that it only lasts as long as the sole proprietor is alive. And there was a book I was reading, wonderful book, and talks about how the next step in human evolution was the creation of corporations, because these are things that, in essence, can never die. Corporations, LLCs, they can go on forever. They'll live forever, long past any of us. However, sole proprietorships, there's no legal entity, so it only exists as long as you exist. Once you're gone, well, you're not running a business from heaven, I gotta say. If you could, that would be great. Or maybe you just want to relax, kick back with a margarita, and pass the pearly gates. Now, if the sole proprietor dies or becomes incapacitated, the business ceases to exist. This can be a drawback if you want to pass your business on to heirs or sell it to someone else, because businesses themselves have value, right? If I start a business from the ground up, if I create it and it's now a C Corp, that C Corp has value. So I can sell that business. I can pass that business on to someone else. However, if it's just a sole proprietorship, there's no legal entity that has value. Yes, the business activity I conduct has value, but I can't sell that business activity to someone else. I mean, broadly speaking, I technically could kind of do that. But if I just pass away, generally speaking, there's no business structure. But again, this is very generally speaking. In real life, are there exceptions? Are there ways around stuff like this? For sure. But that's why at a certain point, if you're making enough money, if you have employees, if you have the ability to possibly get yourself into some trouble with some liability, makes sense to create some sort of structure and some entity. Now, continuing on here, profits and losses from the business flow through to the sole proprietor's personal tax return, meaning that business income is taxed at the individual level. This can be a benefit for those who want to avoid the double taxation that can occur with corporations, because again, corporations, they make money just as a separate legal entity, and then they get taxed on it, and then they distribute it to their shareholders, who then get taxed on that money again. That's double taxation, a great way to eat away at the profits. However, with sole proprietorships, if I have a nice little bakery and I am selling my cookies and cupcakes and all that good stuff, I just get taxed once with that income on my individual tax return. Now, the sole proprietor, the owner, this is me running my little bakery, running my CPA business. You're also responsible for managing the business, which can provide a high degree of control and flexibility. You're not going to be having to report to shareholders or anything like that. However, it can also be a drawback if you lack the expertise or resources to manage the business effectively. Just, again, talking about the attributes of it, the repercussions of having some sort of entity like this. Now, finally, the sole proprietor can sell the business at will, which, as we mentioned, can be a benefit or a drawback. If you want to cash out or move on to other ventures, it's not like you're stuck to some legal entity. However, finding a buyer for this can be difficult because there's no separate legal entity to sell. So someone who wants to buy your business and get into the business, if I'm done dealing with the CPA business and I want to pass on my business to someone else and sell it to them, it may be more difficult because there's no specific legal entity to just sign away. I am going to have to kind of transfer my business over to this other person, dealing with logistics there, that can be difficult. Now, overall, this sole proprietorship, it's a good option for those who want to start a small business or work as a self-employed individual. Again, self-employed, if you're driving for Uber or Lyft, you don't really have a business there, but it's technically legally the same thing. It's you're a self-employed individual. However, the unlimited personal liability, that's a little bit scary. That's why, again, if you are dealing with a business that has a lot of machinery, things that could fall on someone, hurt someone, you're driving a lot, you might want to have a legal structure, legal entity there. Whereas if you're just doing CPA work, well, CPA work could also have liability as well. But let's just say you're tutoring for the CPA exam. There's not much legal liability within that, so you may not really care about creating a legal entity. Again, not that I know anything about that. So there could be drawbacks here. Lots of items to consider before starting a business. Let's see a nice little example. We got a bakery. Wouldn't you know it? Kind of talking about bakeries. Definitely in the mood for something good here. Jane's Home Bakery. It's an example of a sole proprietorship. Jane is a talented baker, started her own business from her home kitchen, selling homemade cakes, pastries, and bread to her local community. As a sole proprietor, the profits and losses from her bakery flow through to her personal tax return. This allows her to avoid the double taxation that occurs with corporations, as she only pays income taxes on her personal tax return. Now, overall, you can run, there's nothing stopping you from running a sole proprietorship bakery, but there may be liability if something falls into the bread that you bake, and maybe it's like a piece of machinery and then someone bites down on the bread and gets hurt and sues you. That could be a problem. So again, a reason to maybe create a legal entity, but there's nothing stopping you from using this as a sole proprietorship. Now, as the sole proprietor, Jane's responsible for managing all aspects of her business, from baking to marketing and customer relations. Now, Jane can also hire employees. I'm not going to get into legality of hiring someone and not having a legal entity. But yeah, you can have people that work with you and for you. That's not illegal because you don't have a legal entity, but there's complications with that because you don't have a legal entity that's actually hiring them. So you're on the hook again as well for them or whatever they're doing. So if they go and commit some atrocity, or if they commit some tort, talking about tort law, we'll see that in business law, on company time, you may be personally on the hook for that. So again, another reason you may want to create a legal entity. Now, overall, she's going to have a high degree of control and flexibility in her business operations. However, as the business grows, she may find it challenging to manage all aspects without additional expertise or resources. Maybe she's got a lot of consultants that are helping her on all of this. Good for her. Now, if Jane decides to retire or pursue other ventures, she has the option to sell her bakery at any time. However, finding a buyer for a sole proprietorship like Jane's Home Bakery can be difficult because there's no separate legal entity to sell. This is a good thing and a bad thing. It may be difficult to sell a separate legal entity because there's a lot more paperwork and items to deal with. However, there is actually a legal entity to sell. If I'm trying to sell a business, but there's no legal paperwork with it, like if I'm trying to sell a car, there is a title to that car. It's a recognized legal item by the government. But if there's no actual legal business to sell to someone, that could hinder the selling process. Potential buyers may be hesitant to purchase it as it's so closely tied to its owner, because maybe as soon as she sells it, everyone says, oh, Jane doesn't own it anymore. Under new management, I don't want to buy from this. The transaction may require more legal and financial work to separate the business assets from Jane's personal assets. Another important point there as well. Jane might say, oh, well, I actually own everything personally. The business doesn't own anything. So there could be a lot of complications there. Whereas if you have a separate legal entity, it's going to say that, okay, this LLC that Jane has actually owns the ovens, the cash registers, the display containers, all of that, wanting to distinguish between who owns what. That is helpful for selling the business. Now, overall, it's a good example of a sole proprietorship. It highlights the benefits and drawbacks of this type of business structure. It allows Jane to avoid double taxation, which is a great benefit, and maintain control over her business, but she also faces unlimited personal liability and potential challenges when selling the business. All right, it's a lot about sole proprietorships, but these are quite important because you'll see a lot of Schedule C. Schedule C, very common sim to see on the exam. Make sure you also know the Schedule C is where you report this type of income. That is something to memorize. Let's keep moving along and take a look at some tax forms. Hey, wouldn't you know it? I got a nice Schedule C for you right here. Let's look through it. This is a Schedule C. It's part of the Form 1040, as you see right here. And what happens is you put all of your business income and expense items on this, which then flow through to eventually the 1040. Now, one important point with the Schedule C, and this is an advantage of creating an entity. Well, you're not creating a legal entity, but having a business like this, and the IRS meant it to be like this, to incentivize people to create businesses, stimulate the economy, right? All that good stuff, is normally my W-2 income from my job. There's not much I can do to deduct that, to lower that amount. I can contribute money to my 401k. I can take a couple credits if I'm eligible for them, but there's not really ways to reduce my income. However, if I have a Schedule C and I have legitimate losses from the business, I can actually deduct those losses from my overall income. Because you see here, we put in our income. So Jane's Bakery, she has made $100,000 from selling all these things, put it there. She advertised a little bit, some deductions. We've got some mortgage. Maybe you bought a bakery, so you know, building for it. So you got some mortgage there. You got repairs and maintenance, travel, utilities, anything like that. These are all expenses. So you get your overall net income. And then what happens to that? That flows to the Schedule 1, which then flows to the face of the 1040. There you go. That loss you may have. So if you have $100,000 of maybe, so Jane also works for, you know, a normal office job and then has this bakery on the side. If Jane makes $100,000 from her normal job, and then let's say her net loss from this bakery is $6,000, so she, you know, has a net loss of $6,000. Year was not too good, but also maybe she legitimately uses the tax code to take a loss, and, you know, maybe she's still doing pretty well for herself, but she takes a loss in this year. She can actually deduct the $6,000 from her overall wages from her job, which normally, it's like I said, it's very hard to reduce your income from your normal W-2 job. There we go. Get familiar with the tax forms. Why do I say that? It's not like you're going to have to identify the items. Oh, line 8 is advertising. No, that also could change year to year. But overall, why would it be important? Well, one, this is essentially one big calculator, right? This is one big calculator of all of the items you'll see within the sole proprietorship business. And also, SIMs are structured very much like the tax forms. This makes for a great SIM. So if you've got a bunch of text on the side, it might say, oh, you got sales from your bakery, and then you put that in on gross receipts, and then you have repairs and maintenance for the ovens, and where do you put that? So the SIMs will look a lot like the tax forms. The more you get familiar with them, the better off you'll be. But when you are seeing a multiple choice question, this is something I'm going to say nonstop throughout the entire exam, so get used to it. Whenever you see a question and it says, okay, you've got travel expenses, she traveled to a seminar to learn more about baking, where does that go? And if that's a multiple choice question, take a look at the actual tax form. We'll have them in the resources pretty much in every lesson where it's relevant, as well as feel free to pull it up on another monitor. Hey, I recommend studying with like 15 monitors. It's a great time. No, myself, the most I've ever done is like 3 extra monitors at a time. So I'm a little crazy like that. I have seen people use 5 monitors back at the big 4, but that is aggressive as well. So use these tax forms, print them out. Also, you're doing multiple choice questions. Just see where it goes. Visualizing it and seeing where everything goes makes it a little more real. Helps you remember as well that items go to your Schedule C, then they flow to the Schedule 1, then they flow to the face of the 1040. That's super important because that as well helps you understand how this whole tax system works, and then eventually answer questions, get them correct on the exam. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.